What is up, everyone? So it is a Saturday morning. I'm sure you all are up and thinking about these questions and thinking about the deepest issues of life and especially meta issues of atheism versus theism. I'm sure that's what we're all thinking about on a Saturday morning. But today I have two awesome gents with me, gentlemen. So starting with Ken, why don't you tell us who you are, what you do, and then Benjamin Blake Speed Watkins, which is clearly a very common name.
His parents have a good sense of humor. Well, as far as what I do within the context of what we're here for today, is I consider myself an independent researcher, and there's various things that catch my interest. And if that happens, my brain gets happy because it likes locking into things that I have an interest in. And that's probably how I end up writing so many books is I'll go through a process of learning about something and then I figure, well, I might as well just type that out. And it's kind of like my researcher's little cabinet. You get to read it in a book because I'm saying, hey, here's what I learned. Or else maybe I'll write a book about something I've already known a lot about. But I have those experiences where I say, hey, I want to know something new, or I want to dig into this, and then the results tend to be a book, which is why my website is filled with articles. And then sometimes I say, hey, I've written a lot about a certain subject, might as well turn those into a book. And atheism is definitely one of those things that caught my interest. It's actually one of the primary reasons I got online is to be able to start digging into that issue and interacting with atheists, which I've been doing regularly for, I don't know, almost 2 decades now. And so, one thing that interests me, regardless of who I'm listening to, is the meta level issues, which serve as sort of the foundation or the premises or really the person's worldview. So, when I'm listening to somebody, let's say what they're saying is at this level, but then I'm catching what's underneath that, what's holding that up, right? That would be the meta level issues, is the foundations, the worldview philosophy upon which they're saying what they're saying. So that's one thing that's always interested me, and that's what we're here to discuss today, which is why this discussion's titled "Does Atheism Have Meta Questions Issues?" I don't know if it has meta questions issues. I think it has meta answers issues. And so that's what we're here to discuss. And I'm pleased to do so with my new friend, Ben and John.
So, Ben, before we start, have you ever stolen something small like a pencil before?
I have not. I am morally perfect.
Well, I guess that's a good introduction to who you are. Now, why don't you tell us who you are, and then we can you guys can just start going back and forth.
And I'm having some audio issues.
Were you able to
Just
hear
so
me?
you know, I've been able to hear you fine.
Okay. That should y'all can still hear me, right?
Yes.
Sweet. Okay. So my name's Benjamin Blake Speed Watkins. That is my real name. That was my parents gave it to me. Their family names, and so it makes me very easily searchable on Google. So I try to use it. But I usually go by Ben. I'm one of the hosts of Real Atheology, a philosophy of religion podcast. So I have some camaraderie here with Ken in that I'm kind of my own independent researcher, and so I have a team of other non-theists, and we just explore questions in the philosophy of religion as seriously as we can, while giving our own reflections on how we see what we call the great debate, the question of God's existence, and um, what our philosophical concepts can look like once we've rejected something like perfect being theism, or even broader, more watered down concepts of theism. Something like polytheism.
Ben,
And so, yeah,
you're oh, sorry, your audio is a little bit choppy on both of our ends.
okay, that's what I was worried about.
Now it's fine when you're talking.
Okay, so I'll try to. If it continues to have issues, just let me know, and I'll try to refresh it and see if that solves it.
It sounds like it's just a really sensitive mic, and maybe you're a little too close to it.
Maybe I'm too close to the mic. Fair enough. How's that?
That's pretty good.
Much better. Okay. So yeah, I'll be honest, I don't know much of Ken's background, so I don't know particularly what sort of meta questions he had in mind. I suspect that they're questions of an epistemological nature, about the nature of knowledge, and perhaps there's an underlying presuppositional apologetics tradition that he's drawing from, something like Van Til or Greg Bahnsen. I don't know. I guess now would be a good time to kind of just lay out what are the questions to discuss tonight. What are the concepts we're going to be using? Maybe now could be a good time to define some terms, and just get a grasp over what is the central theme that we want to discuss.
Actually, if you don't mind, I would be curious about what reasons do you have for doing the show that you do?
Yeah, so we find the questions in the philosophy of religion really interesting. So we find philosophy interesting just on its own, but particularly questions in the philosophy of religion are unique in that they touch on so many aspects of philosophy. And so there's questions of, what is faith? How does it relate to science? There's obviously the big question of God's existence. There's questions of the history of religion. How has history evolved? How has religion evolved through history? And what can religion look like in the future? So these are just all really interesting questions that we've explored from non-theistic perspectives, and we think that we have some interesting things to add to the conversations that surround those big questions.
So then, when you say we find and that it's interesting, is that essentially it? It's that's pretty much your premise then. You personally find something interesting and you seek to discuss it, or is it about some of those worldview philosophies, or what you call religion, can be identified as being false, and some or none can be identified as true?
Well, so that's one of the questions that we pose is, so just because we reject something like perfect being theism, we think it's too quick of a move to then say that all religions are false. That's kind of a Western idea, really. And so the question is there something divine? Is there something worthy of our worship in the world? Is there a religious form of life that's better than others? Is there a religious form of life that's closer to the truth? So those are the kinds of questions we take up. And even among me and my co-hosts, we don't always agree on the answers to those questions. And so it's an interesting area where there's disagreement within our own camp, and there's also disagreement across camps, in the sense that theists have answers to these questions that are very radically different from ours. And so characterizing those disagreements and trying to resolve disagreements as much as we can, I think, helps us in other areas of philosophy. So philosophy is much bigger than the philosophy of religion. There's ethics, asking questions of what ought we do? Well, that question is going to be really important to something like the religious form of life that we think is closest to the truth. So we can use these disagreements and arguments on both sides to help us see a little further on these bigger questions. We can, to borrow a phrase, from Newton to stand on the shoulders of giants in the hopes of seeing a little further.
I just thought to note, almost in passing, that I have no problem with you using the word religion, but I would say that the only positive reference to religion in the Bible, which is my perspective, is James 1:27. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their afflictions and to keep oneself unstained from the world. So I know that a modern day definition of religion would be some kind of system that revolves around worshiping a deity. And so that's why I said I don't technically have a problem with you using it. But that would be my perspective. And it's quite different from the modern day dictionaries. And
Sure.
now,
So would
yeah,
you say that your view of knowledge, what it is to know the world, presupposes something like a Christian tradition? So if you were trying to answer the question of what is knowledge, you would essentially refer to that passage. James, I'm sorry, what was it? It was from James
James 1:27.
1:27. You would your answer to that question uses that reference to answer that question. Is that a fair way of characterizing your view?
So I wouldn't say it would just be a Christian view, because as a Jew, of course, I'm bringing along the Tanakh as well, the Old Testament. And I mean, of course, as a Christian, I do the same. But I just wanted to emphasize that my background is that I'm a Jew who came to accept Jesus, so I'm a Messianic-Jew. So I'm bringing the whole enchilada with me. And
no, that's fair. I don't
well,
want to shoehorn you with a tradition that you're
no, it's
not a
fine.
part of.
That's why I thought to explain that.
Yeah, I'm totally with you.
Being
But
slightly broader.
the point I would really want to focus on is that your answer to this question presupposes. So this again, I'm suspecting that you're drawing from a presuppositional apologetics tradition. If you're not, please let me know. I don't want to. But what I think you want to say is that your tradition, however it is that you characterize that tradition, is presupposed in your answer to what knowledge is. So, because you were saying how it's, earlier there was a comparison of worldviews. So your worldview is presupposed in this question. Or, because there's another strategy to this. There's the foundationalist approach that says, no, we start from a foundation and worldviews are built up from that foundation. You see how there's two ways we could look at this, and I want to know which one of them are you closer to?
I would almost think that's a form of a false dichotomy, only because, for instance, when I came to recognize Jesus as my Messiah, I came with a worldview that had developed before that. But then thereafter, that the worldview was modified, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's, in a way, it is top down, it is bottom up. So for instance, when I did that, I couldn't just delete everything and get a download of brand new stuff. So there's a kind of this combination that happened right now.
Yeah.
Specifically,
well, so the reason I ask is because and you're absolutely right. If I had given those as a dichotomy, that would be a false dichotomy for sure. I didn't mean to put them as mutual. These are exhaustive choices that we have to choose from. Because if you say
not that would matter on atheism, but I just thought I'd point it out.
Well, and this is a good segment. I think a question to guide the conversation would be, Ken, what are your starting points, and can atheism have the same starting points? So I think that's a good place to go for the conversation.
Okay, and I'll just take just a second, because I realized you asked me a question and we kind of stumbled over it. The James 1:27 definition of a religion would actually end up touching upon ethics, I think, more. So if we get there, then we can circle back to that. Now, yes, that's a perfect question because Ben referred to his activities on the show being about getting quote unquote closer to the truth. So that was a very important thing to point out. So what is the truth to which you're referring? And that's, I think, what John has led us to discussing right now. So yeah, on my worldview, truth is, it actually is, it exists, it's absolute. Discerning truth is a universal imperative, as is adhering to the truth, and the truth actually personified in the person of Jesus, who identified himself with the truth. So then that made me curious as to what is the truth to which you're referring?
Right. So, truth, on my view, and so I want to start off by saying that this is my view of truth. There are atheists in my camp who disagree with me. There's a family, a variety of views that you can take here, and so this is my attempt at answering a big question in epistemology: what is truth? And so I think that truth is a property of propositions. And so that's what I mean when I claim that some proposition is true. Some propositions have the property of being true if they correctly characterize what is the case. And so this is what it is for some claim to be true. And so I think these answers are satisfactory to any semantic or ontological questions we may have about truth. And so I guess to back up, to kind of put my whole view on the table so that people can understand where I'm coming from. My sympathies regarding the science of knowledge, or what's often called epistemology, are with Kant and Hegel broadly. So to be clear, my view is a rationalist one in the contemporary philosophical tradition of analytic philosophy. So I try to pay particularly close attention to the precision of language, the clarity of concept, and the rigor of argument. And so my view is often called objective or absolute idealism. And so that views roughly that we can have knowledge of the world in and for itself by understanding any determinate concept in itself and then out of itself by way of negation. And so this dialectic implies that humans are rational animals capable of reason or understanding reasons to have certain beliefs by way of concepts or ideas because the world itself has a rational structure. And so Hegel helps us understand my view with his famous dictum, the rational is the real and the real is the rational. And so what this means is that the metaphysics of reality can be understood by the rational capacities of our minds. On my view, whatever is real must be discernible to mind because knowing and being are necessarily part of the same rational whole. So in other words, thinking subjects can know the world because there is, in at least some sense, an identity between thought and being. And so that kind of broadly lays out my view, where I'm coming from, my idea of truth embedded in that larger absolute idealist, objective idealist tradition that we get from the German idealists like Kant and Hegel.
If you don't mind, I think I just want to take a step back to ask one question before we continue here, because you referred to my view and your camp, but I realized I don't know what that is. So if you call yourself an atheist, what denomination or sect or however you want to think of it would you
right? So I'm an atheist in the sense that I believe that there are no gods, and where gods are understood as disembodied minds that inhabit a supernatural realm and have causal influence over the natural world. So I'm a metaphysical naturalist, and so I believe those commitments imply atheism in its broadest sense. So I do reject perfect theism, but I reject all forms of theism. I think they are all false. I think that just like there are no witches in the world, all of our claims about witches are false. I think that all claims about gods are false because there are no gods.
Okay, so it's a positive affirmation.
Yes.
So you,
I am not
it's a,
one of the lack theist definitions of atheism. I don't just merely lack a belief. I'm not
good,
merely a non-theist.
good.
Um,
I
I'm an atheist in
thank you
a
for being
positive sense.
one of the bold ones to just come out and say that you're claiming to actually know that no gods exist anywhere.
Well, yeah. So I would say that that's a claim to knowledge. So when
Yeah,
you say I would call, that I know, people might think that you think that knowledge implies certainty. Am I certain about this belief? No, I have varying degrees of confidence in my beliefs. I'm more certain in many of my metaphysical and moral beliefs
okay.
than I am in the metaphysical claim that there are no gods. I do save the epistemic possibility open that my mind could be changed by evidence. As evidence comes in, my views can change. That's what I think it means to proportion our belief to the
Yeah,
evidence.
and also that touches upon what I noted earlier about the false dichotomy, which is that's what you're saying. You have this worldview, but there might be another worldview that comes along and crashes into it and maybe merges with it.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that's necessarily going to happen with my
Yeah,
view, because I like to fashion myself these days as something of a Hegelian, and so that's just part of the system. In that my thought is at a certain point in the dialectic, and it's going to start to bring about tensions. There's going to be determinate negations that are brought about by my view that I'm going to have to resolve. There's never going to be a point in the process in which I can cleanly say, this is my view and all these views are false. It's an
gotcha.
ever changing,
Okay.
always evolving piece. There's people like to think of knowledge as this kind of static thing. The Hegelian has a very dynamic view of knowledge.
Yeah, it
It's
has
not something that just kind of floats out there in the world. It's something that is ever processing, growing. It's
yes.
like, if one of the analogies that Hegelians like to use is the idea of a seed growing into a tree. The knowledge is in the seed, but it has to grow out over time. And so Geist or spirit, what they call in the Hegelian tradition, is this idea of through time, everything is growing, everything is branching out. And instead of thinking of it as a tree, the other metaphor that's used is circles inside of circles. And so that's the idea of you've got one circle bubbling up with knowledge, then another one bubbles up, they overlap, give rise to other bubbles. And as this happens over time, knowledge refines itself and we grow closer to the truth.
Yes, so yeah, I get it. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis.
Yeah, roughly. Those are Fichte's
Yeah.
terms, but yeah, that helps us
those are
broadly
the
outline
Hegelian.
them.
But now my concern is when you were talking about your concept of the truth, for my taste, it wasn't meta level enough. So, for example, when you refer to that the universe has a rational structure, by definition, on your worldview, that may be true that it has a rational structure, but that rational structure would be accidental. And then you refer to the rational capacities of the human mind or brain. I don't recall which one you used, and I don't know if we even want to go there today. But the rational capacities of the human mind would also be accidental. Wouldn't you say so, on your view?
So no, on my view, there's going to be necessary truths, and so it would be a necessary truth that the world has a rational structure. Because remember, I said that there's an identity between thought and being. Well, identity claims are necessary claims. So if we are rational creatures, it's because the universe is rational, and we are part of the universe. The universe
and the
gave
universe
rise
is
to
rational
us.
because
That's part of the world. That's just an essential feature of the world to to have a rational structure.
Yeah, so we're agreeing. That's just how it is. It's just accidental. That's how it is. That's what
Well, it's not accidental. So to say it's accidental means that it could have been some other way.
Well,
It's this way, but it could have been some other way.
Yeah, on your
I want to
worldview,
deny
it could
that.
have
I want
been,
to say
right?
that no, that's just a necessary fact. worlds that obtain necessarily have a rational structure to them. There is no of the ways the world could be. If we could look across all possible worlds, there's no possible world that just doesn't have a rational structure. I don't even know what it means to say that a world has no rational structure.
Hold on a second, because I don't think we're going meta level enough. So let's back up from the philosophical semantics for just a minute, and let's just try to understand visually what we're talking about. No God exists. There's no creator, no designer, nothing. And maybe this isn't quite your view, but let's just say on a basic level, nothing accidentally exploded and caused nothing to become everything for no reason. And here we are. So that the universe could have ended up being extremely different. And that's just the way reality and truth would have been. But when nothing somehow accidented the universe into being, it just so happens to have happened this way. Right? It wasn't purposeful. It wasn't goal-driven. It wasn't volitional. It wasn't designed or created. It just, boom, it just happened. And it just so happens to have happened this way, which is why I'm using the term accident. Because the universe, even if quote-unquote rational, could have been very, very different. Like, say, where 1 + 1 = cucumber. I mean, who knows? The possibilities are endless.
Well, so I would just deny that those are possibilities. The world in which 1 + 1 = cucumber is just a nonsense. So it just we might be able to utter these
but
words.
That's nonsense on our universe.
On any universe. This is what I'm going to want to say. That of any possible universe that can obtain, that will be a nonsense claim. There's no possible world where that claim is true.
I'm not seeing how that follows from that the universe was just accidented into being.
Well, so it depends on. So now it seems like we're moving kind of to a cosmological argument here, and which you're saying the world was just kind of accidented into being. Well, so that's not my view. So when it comes to something like cosmological arguments, again, I think those are tools embedded in a much larger question. Why is there something rather than nothing? And so I think the answer, why is there something rather than nothing, has an obvious answer. There's always been something. The theist just says it's always been God. And the naturalist or atheist like myself says, well, it's always been the universe. In some sense, there's always existed a universe. And so to say that the universe is just an accident.
Well, are you referring to just eternal matter, or are you talking about this here universe?
So it could be either one. So I'm not sure if there is a multiverse, but there might be a necessary initial singular, like a universal wave function, a necessarily existent universal wave function, and that is the ground of all of reality.
Okay, well, yeah. You might, in the future, you might want to be cautious about that, because if you're claiming steady state theory, that's going to be an issue you're going to have with cosmogonists. And if you're going to appeal to a multiverse, if the view is that anything and everything could and can and does happen somewhere in those, then you just prove God's existence. But I guess back to the issue of this eternal, boy, I don't even know what to call it. I would almost wonder if you're just finding a convenient way to swap out the word God for swapping in some eternal energy or matter that somehow exists by necessity. Is it?
Well, I also make very specific claims about it that are incompatible with theism, or at least perfect being theism. And I make other claims that are incompatible with theism more broadly. So I'll just lay out two. So the first is that the universe is indifferent to the suffering of sentient life. And so that explains why there is so much evil and suffering in the world. And so the hypothesis of indifference is straightforwardly incompatible with a loving God or a morally perfect God. And so another thing I think about this universe is that it's causally closed, that something like the conservation of mass and energy is all the way down universal, that's at bottom of causal reality. You can't violate something like the conservation of energy. So that means that all mental activity has a physical base in something physical, so like an embodied brain, a complex physical structure. And so that's just straightforwardly incompatible with a disembodied mind that causally interacts with the world. And so those are claims that it might seem like I'm just trying to identify some necessary feature of the universe and just not call that God. Well, I make other claims about it that are just straightforwardly incompatible with God as he is traditionally conceived.
So then we're still at the point where whatever this eternal thing is, on your view, just is.
Sure, the multiverse just is. It's necessary. There's just no further explanation for it. It just is.
Okay, I didn't realize you were now jumping to actually proposing a multiverse, but wouldn't you?
So it's a possibility. Like again, I'm using these as example, like to help visualize the concept of.
Fair enough.
There might, our universe might be the only universe, and it might exist timelessly, or our observable universe might exist as a multiverse world ensemble. This is an interesting question in cosmology. I am not a cosmologist. I merely have a window inside as a non-specialist who reads widely in literature targeted towards non-specialists. So that's my view. I think the multiverse is a very elegant solution to many different cosmological problems, but I realize that's controversial, and not everyone in my camp is going to accept that. It also might be an
elegant solution to proving God's existence, since in one of those universes, surely God exists.
Well, so I've taken that route. I've supposed that route before, and that route doesn't help us at all with something like the problem of evil or the problem of divine hiddenness, which are easily the two biggest problems that something like perfect being theism faces. So if we concede these cosmological arguments in their entirety, they don't give us any resources to undercut something like the conclusion of an argument from evil. So this is what's known as the gap problem.
Yeah, well,
go ahead.
If you're talking about problems, that is based on hidden assumptions. So I don't even see how we're there yet. But I wonder what this is. I hate to bring this up because I feel it's just taking us away from the what we should be discussing. But what would you think of one of the universes within the multiverse, according to which there is no multiverse, there's just the universe? Wouldn't that have to be accepted as truth, and therefore the multiverse would be done away with?
I don't think I understand the question. I'm sorry. Can you try again?
Yeah. So like we're envisioning all these universes, right? The world ensemble.
Yeah.
But according to one of them, there is no multiverse. According to one of them, it is absolutely true that there's just the one universe.
No, so it couldn't be true in one of those world ensembles that there is no multiverse.
But by definition, it is, because all possibilities would be worked out. So that one would.
I don't know what that means. All possibilities would be worked out. What I'm saying is that it would be saying as a truth something that contradicts it. By the way, we've made the supposition that there is a world ensemble. So then to also suppose that somewhere in this world ensemble it is true that there is no world ensemble. All we've done is constructed a contradiction. And we've said, let's just imagine that this is the case. I'm going to say that that's just not an imaginable scenario. We can't imagine a world ensemble where in one of those universes it is also true that there is no world ensemble. Yeah, that is just an incoherent idea. We can speak out loud, but when we think about it, it's not an actual possibility.
But I'm afraid that you're you're bringing along a series of concepts such as that would be a contradiction. But at this stage, you're still just imposing that sort of a concept, like of a contradiction, as a hidden assumption. So I guess we better back out of the cosmogony discussion, although I mean, to me, it's interesting, but it's not really germane.
Sure. So maybe we could turn our focus to the nature of contradictions, because it seems like you want to even challenge my appeal to something like a contradiction.
And ultimately, it's still going to be back to the issue of, okay, is there a word you prefer for this eternal whatever it is, so I don't have to keep saying eternal whatever it is?
So we can just say the initial state of the universe.
Okay.
If there was an initial state, it exists in a timeless state, and the universe is timeless. Or there's an infinite an infinite set of past events, and in which case the universe is also eternal. These are just two different models. So when you say, like, what is it that I can refer to that you believe it? That's just it. There's a ton of models on there, and I believe a family of models, an eternalist model. That one is the one closest to the truth. And so there is no one model that I think, but the one I gave as an example was there's a necessarily existent universal wave function, and that this universal wave function characterizes all of the possible universes in the multiverse, and it has a rational structure to it.
I'm not sure how we refer to it, the initial state of something eternal, but that might be more like a philosophical or just semantic issue.
Well, so you think of it like, so the block view of the universe, this is the standard view given cosmologists today using Einstein's theory of relativity, is that the timeline is like a ruler. And so there is wouldn't say that the first point of the ruler is where the ruler begins to exist. You just say there's just a first point on the ruler. So there's just a first moment of time. And to say what is before the first moment of time is like asking what's north of the North Pole.
Right. But
it's just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Sorry. First moment of time, meaning within our perspective of our universe.
Yeah, our observable universe has a first moment of time.
So then I'd guess that we could still say that this initial condition is what I would call accidental, because it wasn't created and it wasn't designed. It just exists out of what you would consider necessity.
So yes, so according to my view, necessarily there exists one member of the set of contingent things.
Right. So we've kind of come full circle in that your view of the universe and ergo of truth and reality is that it is accidental.
So when you say accidental, again, this is a very nebulous term here, because we could mean very many different things by being accidental.
The way I defined it earlier is that it wasn't designed, it wasn't created, it isn't the result of a plan or a goal. It is just there. It just happens to have happened this way.
Yeah, so the explanation for why there's something rather than nothing is that there's always been something. Why is there this something rather than something else? There just is no explanation for why there is this something rather than else. The only answer that we can give is because it follows necessarily from the laws of nature, or because it's got objective chancy features. Like what quantum mechanics would say, that there's what separates us from the necessity of the world are the objective chancy features of the world. And so again, these are models of the ways of thinking of the universe, and there's many other different models. You don't have to necessarily prescribe to my model here. This is a cosmological model, so I thought we were moving away from cosmological models and moving back to epistemic models, where we were talking about contradictions and the way knowledge is. So I realize there's some overlap, obviously, in these domains, but where are we focusing? Are we focusing on the cosmological questions of, something being radically accidental in natures of time? Or are we talking about knowledge and contradictions and the way in which we understand and know the world?
Right. So I guess the issue is that the way I'm looking at it, epistemology is based on ontology. So that's why I'm always kind of going back and saying, well, this is an epistemic claim. What's the ontology that's holding it up? So,
My claim was that thought and being are identical. So thought, epistemology, being, ontology.
But
so that's my model on the table for knowledge. Thought and being are two sides of the same coin.
Because see, when you refer to the laws of nature, I'm thinking, well, okay, there's laws of nature and we can agree on that. But on your view, they are the way they are accidentally. They weren't designed, they weren't created. They
could be necessary. There could be other universes with different laws, or these laws might follow necessarily from a quantum theory of gravity that we don't currently have. We don't know. Sure. Those are open questions.
But I'm not sure I'll be able to have a discussion where the comeback is going to be, well, but in a multiverse, it could be different. It's just too broad, right? Because then we're bringing in anything we could possibly imagine into the discussion. So if we narrow ourselves to existence as we know it in this universe, when you refer to the laws of nature, they just happen to have happened the way that they are.
Or they could be necessary. But there could be part of the universal wave function could include a quantum theory of gravity that necessitates the natural laws that we have in our universe. That is an open question in cosmology. So currently there is a famous tension between quantum mechanics and general relativity. These two things, when we put them together, they don't fit coherently together. It's a huge embarrassment of physics. And so what we're trying to do is, we heard the theory of everything, the unifying theory of everything. What they're trying to find is that theory that unifies quantum mechanics with general relativity in what's called a quantum theory of gravity. And so we don't have that theory yet, but if we have that theory, all of the laws that we observe as laws of nature might follow necessarily from that theory of everything that we don't have. It's an open question whether or not those laws are necessary or whether they could have been infinitely different. This is, in the fine-tuning problem, this is what's known as the normalizability problem. We don't actually know the range of possible values that cosmological values could take, like cosmological constants.
Let's just put it on the table and admit neither of us are omniscient, neither of us know it all. So
yes,
to me, that's just a presupposition that would be helpful to acknowledge rather than replying to what we do know with, well, we don't have a theory about this yet, but we might. So then we can't really say anything concrete. Let's just deal with the concrete things we do have so we don't have to keep going into this sort of hypothetical world where things might be different. So at this point, the laws of nature in this universe, we can acknowledge them at an epistemic level, but on an ontological level, they weren't created or designed, so they just are. Even if they are the result of something else that just is. And that's why I'm using the word accidental, to just point out that they just are what they are. And however they came about, it wasn't due to purpose or mind or design or creation.
Okay, I think I see what you're trying to say. You're trying to say that there are facts about our world that are more likely given an intentional design than given a mindless chance process. And because my view implies that these things are the result of mindless chance processes,
right?
They are
exactly
accidental.
Right.
Okay, so we know that that's going to be at least one way misleading to think about it if we just think about the theory of biological evolution. The theory of biological evolution is a mindless chance process. But we're not going to say that biological evolution randomly selects traits. No, there are random variations in gene frequencies. and natural selection selects for fitness. So there's this idea of unconditional chance, of probability kind of in a vacuum with a mindless chance process. But we know that's not how mindless chance processes actually work. They're non-random in this sense. So that's why when I say that, you say, well, our universe is the product of something accidental. That accidental can be understood in that ambiguous, unconditional probability sense. Whereas the naturalist is actually going to be putting forward a mindless chance process that has random features, but ultimately non-randomly selects for certain features as well. So to say that it's radically accidental, or to just even say that it's accidental. So, and also accidental has meanings in other areas of philosophy of religion, specifically Thomist philosophy of religion. So they have, there's these accidental properties.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That could mean something very different. When you say our universe is an accident, we got to be very clear about what we mean when we say that, because just like how I'm a naturalist, I have to be very careful about what I mean by being a naturalist.
Yeah, that's why I defined what I meant by it almost a half hour ago. So then my issue would still be that, so I don't want to get into the details of biological properties because we're not even close to that yet, but you seem to anthropomorphize natural selection a bit too much for my taste, in that what we're referring to as selection is what Richard Dawkins referred to as the Grim Reaper. Something falls over dead or it doesn't. And the thing is that the mutations that occurred to it were as accidental as that it exists in the first place, as is the environment in which it finds itself, that it's either going to survive or not. The whole kit and caboodle is a long series of accidents. And I'm not sure what the end goal would be anyway. If you're saying that it's selecting for survivability, well, the desire, the instinct, the very concept of survival is accidental as well. It just happens to have happened. And I guess thank God, or thank the initial condition that it happened to the very first living being, or else we wouldn't be here to have a discussion. So that's I'm still somehow being drawn back to try to understand your statements from your ontology, which is that we're getting way ahead of it and talking about things such as surviving without yet establishing what is surviving, why survive, what's the purpose or instinct to survive. It's another accident that came about by an accidental mutation to an accidentally existing bioorganism. You're muted.
He's not even muted. His sound isn't coming through.
Uh-oh.
Oh, sorry about that.
There we go.
No.
So I don't think you meant to say that Richard Dawkins refers to biological evolution as the Grim Reaper. He refers to it as the blind watchmaker.
No, he refers to natural selection as the Grim Reaper as a metaphor.
Yeah, well, and so he also refers to it as the blind watchmaker, which is the point that I'm trying to make here, is that there is no looking forward or looking ahead on an evolutionary process. To say that it's has a purpose is to misunderstand the mindless chance process that is natural selection, that non-randomly selects for fitnesses via environmental pressures and in a certain population of gene frequencies that has random frequency.
And that's why the way things are is categorizable as accidental.
So we're describing how we're giving a historical account of how certain features came about. And so if you want to say that certain of those features are radically accidental, okay, like I totally know what you mean when you say that. But then there's this other question of why care about something like survivability? Why is continuing to exist something good? That's not a question about how something came about. That is a question of value. That is a question of how should we judge something like being alive versus being dead? What is the value that we should assign to death and the value that we should assign to life? That's a very different question than how did life come about? And nothing about how life comes about, how the world is, nothing morally follows about the value of life from those facts. This is the famous is-ought gap, the famous
Indeed.
distinction. The way the world is, how life evolved is how it is. Whether or not we should care about life in itself is how the world ought to be. We should, ought, or must care about life, and we should, ought, or must care about death, but in a negative way, in a way that is opposite the way we care about life. None of that follows either from the fact of how what we could have been created by God, we could have evolved, we could have just sprung into existence purely as a random event, bam, in time. None of that tells us nothing about the value
Right.
of life and death follows from those facts either.
And
That's the
why I
distinction
mentioned
between
that
an is fact and an
127 would
ought fact.
pertain to ethics. Sorry, I talked over you there. That's why I was saying if we eventually get to ethics, that's where James 127 would come in. But just again, without getting ahead of ourselves, which I think we're just constantly doing, is if you were to say that truth exists because it is understandable as reflecting the nature of the universe, which we would call reality, right? Then I'm pointing out that on your view, it's accidental. You want to call it necessary. So then, even if it's somehow necessary, then there's the issue of there would be no universal imperative to adhere to truth or reality, on your view.
Why is that?
Well, because again, it wasn't created or designed. It's a thing that just happens to have happened.
But
then
why?
when
So
I,
let's
as
say
a
that it
living
was
organism,
created
just
and it
happened-
was designed. Why should I care about it because it was created or designed? That's how it is. So now derive an ought fact from that. Why should I care about it?
Okay, I'm afraid that's a tu quoque. Not that it really matters on atheism, but I'm just saying if the view we're starting with is that it exists by uncaused, undesigned necessity, then adherence to it would also be uncaused and uncreated.
Yeah, I think that it's
by
an
necessity.
uncaused necessary truth that pleasure is better than pain. And I don't even think that an omnipotent God could just make pain better than pleasure.
Well, but I'm not sure how you get there from a point of view that the neurochemistry that we would use to interpret that we should prefer pleasure to pain is also accidental.
And so God's command to prefer life rather than death is accidental.
Well, no, but that would get us again into the tu quoque area. So I'm just still trying to understand.
Well, no, these are mirroring objections. So when I mirror an objection, so you give an objection, and I mirror that objection, that objection also applies to you. This objection goes both ways. You say that's a tu quo fallacy, when
Not
it's
that it
not.
matters on atheism.
No, it's what. So what I'm doing by mirroring an objection is to say that this is a problem for both of us. This is a problem that we both have to solve. And
So
that if you say, well, you can't solve it this way, your view doesn't follow from that. I can say your view doesn't follow from that.
Yeah.
And you can say that. So again, we're not getting ahead of ourselves. We're not actually moving. We're not actually progressing forward.
Right, and part of it is why the reason to escape from a strict tu quoque would be to you give your response and then mirror me, and then let me give my response instead of replying with a mirror. You first need to look in the mirror, and then you need to turn it on me. But you're just saying, you asked me a question, here's the mirror. So where's your reply to that?
I thought I
Yes.
did. I thought I have laid out the reply. I apologize. I thought that was what I've been trying to do. So I apologize if it didn't come off
we're at the
clear enough.
point of that you're saying we should prefer pleasure to pain, but that would be based on
That's a necessary truth. That's not so. So again, like an omnipotent being can't just can't just cause pain to be better than pleasure. Just like he can't make 2 + 2 = 5. That's just not something an omnipotent being could do. And so you're saying, well, if it's all just chemicals in my brain, which I don't think chemicals in brain even determine moral facts. If we were reducing moral facts to chemicals in brains, yeah, your objection might go through, but the exact same objection goes through if you try to reduce this stuff to God's commands. What is the reason why God commands pleasure to be better than pain, or for pain to be better than pleasure? There wouldn't be. It would just radically be an accident.
Ben, how would you answer why? Never mind. I won't go with that route. I just find this interesting in my stoicism.
Fair enough. I do have to be getting going here pretty soon, though. My baby's going to be waking up from a nap here.
Do you guys have time for some questions from the audience?
Yes. Let's just do questions and then close. I guess I don't have a closing statement or anything, but just kind of a sending off.
My only closing statement would be, let's do it again, because it's been fascinating.
Absolutely. It's been a fun time. I really enjoy these.
I feel like we've barely getting started.
We've only scratched the surface. And the thing about philosophical discussions is they're never done. There's just always more to be said next time.
Yeah. So actually I'm going to hog my own platform. I have a question for you, Ben. You talked about the universe as a closed system. I'm trying to remember the principle you described it as.
A causally closed system. And so something like the conservation of energy, of mass and energy, is at the bottom something fundamental.
Yes. And you said something about mind in relation to that.
Yes. So an implication of this view is that any mental activity that causally interacts with the world, which obviously we take our minds to causally influence the world. If our minds have any causal influence on the world, they will obey that conservation of mass and energy. So all mental activity is going to have a physical basis. It's going to depend on something physical, like a complex structure, like a brain, or maybe something synthetic, like a computer. All minds are going to be physically dependent because the universe is causally closed. There's nothing outside. There aren't disembodied minds that reach in and change the net total energy of the universe. The net total energy in the universe is always constant.
I find that interesting because you're a compatibilist, right?
I am.
And that would seem most consistent because it seems like libertarian free will would be this mental activity that is not dependent upon physical qualities. Would you agree to that premise?
It does seem that way. However, so free will is a huge rabbit hole. I'll just let everyone know.
Yeah.
So there are libertarian naturalists who believe that that whole physical systems can exert forces over the whole of the system that can't go. So they call it top-down causation. I'm skeptical of top-down causation, but this is one way in which naturalists have tried to defend a libertarian account of freedom.
Do you think that the prior probability would be higher on forms of theism for libertarian free will, just like how you think beauty?
I think if there is libertarian freedom in the world, I think that's just another piece of the argument for moral agency. It's just one of those observations about the world that's just more predicted on theism than naturalism. That's just a coin that would fall. If we're letting evidential chips fall where they may, that's just a chip that falls in favor of theism.
I appreciate that and respect that. I would argue for libertarian free will I think there's a tacit knowledge. I think it's something that sort of has to be experienced in the form of struggle, because I was actually just talking about those who struggle with addiction and have personality disorders and traits. I think that's a different form of knowledge that we have to take into our theoretical virtues of the existentialism of life. But that's a whole different thing I'm working on in my projects.
So the libertarian naturalist is going to want to say that they just don't, their whole, their being, what constitutes their being, doesn't have the top-down causation necessary to overcome the addiction. And so again, there is no, so there's a bootstrapping problem here. It's like, okay, well, how can they attain that kind of downward causation? And so we don't know. It's just one of those things. It's a really difficult thing for, I think, naturalist libertarians to answer. How do you, what is the nature of this top-down causation?
Oh, I'm like, I know people, and you meet people, and such stories and real experiences and real people just aren't brought up into the philosophy of libertarian free will. I'm like, these are things we should be looking at, like predictive powers on a model and so on. And I know people where I'm like, I don't see how one can be how they could at least be a compatibilist in their struggles, and or determinist. But I also believe this is like an experience of reality, so it's not just something subjective in it to themselves. I think they're actually struggling through something, a part of reality, because I'm a realist and experientialist as well. But I didn't want to hog the Q&A because I could go. You also talk about pain versus pleasure, and that's my new favorite topic right now.
I think that basic utilitarian insight is right. I don't think utilitarianism is the whole truth. I'm not a utilitarian, but I think the hedonistic utilitarians got at least part of the truth right.
Well, they all stem from the classic Epicurean versus the Stoics debate. And I'm in the Stoic camp, and it sounds like you would be in an Epicurean camp.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of the disagreement between Stoics and Epicureans was superficial. Their philosophies definitely bear out, but like at the end of the day, people think that Kant and utilitarianism are deeply in tension with each other. And I don't think that's true either. So I think you can pit them against one another and make it seem like there are these really deep tensions between. But I do have a unique view in normative ethics, in that I think that a lot of the disagreement between normative theories is largely superficial. The real disagreement is between rational self-interest and impartial benevolence, which is the moral point of view. Our self-interested point of view, or the point of view that takes everyone impartially. That's, I think, where the real disagreement in normative ethics is.
We're going to have to do another stream on that.
Yeah.
Because that gives pleasure to my mind. Why would anyone assume the universe came into existence for a purpose?
Well, so I think it's a natural way to think about it, because we see in our experience agency. We see things being brought about by the intentional purposes of people. So this is Pele's famous watchmaker argument. He finds a watch on the heath and pretends he's an aboriginal. He doesn't know the function of the watch or who made the watch, but he knows that it's not something natural. It's something intended for a purpose. And so the essential intuition of the teleological argument is that there is order, that there is seeming purposefulness in the world, such that there is this intentional designer. And so I think that's why people think that the universe was created for a purpose, is because of that natural teleological reasoning.
Do you want to throw in your thoughts on that, Ken?
Yes. Well, in essence, I would agree with what Ben just said. And that would be because we would come to such a, I don't know if to call it a conclusion or premise, based on not what we don't know, but based on what we do know. That's why Paley would say something like, we know that things like this were designed, so therefore you would apply that to something as great as the universe or existence itself.
Well, the
Incidentally,
formal probability calculus is that there's an observation that's more likely given theism than not theism. And so that observation is order in the world. So we see, or to use more modern jargon, irreducible complexity. That's the one in biology. Or cosmic fine tuning. These are observations that are said to be more likely given theism than a mindless chance process.
just as a side note, you can find conservation of energy predicted in Genesis 2, the first couple of verses.
That's actually a good segue to this question for you, Ken. Are you a young Earth creationist?
When it comes to the age of the Earth or shape of the Earth, I'm a lot more interested in knowing how many albino chinchillas exist than those issues.
Gotcha.
So, are you a young Earth creationist?
I'm not, because I'm much more interested in other more important issues, like how many albino chinchillas.
Fair. So you're an agnostic on the age of the Earth.
Yeah.
You don't make a judgment one way or the other. That's fair. Because I'm obviously, so I'm a nuclear engineer, so radioactive decay is like kind of my bread and butter. And so the half-life of uranium-238 is 4.8 billion years.
That's just man's word. Just kidding. So question for you, Ben. Do you think that do you doubt the historicity of the Bible, like the existence of Moses or the biblical version of Moses? That's just an example to the overarching question.
So, I am not a historian. I am very, very, very interested in history. And so I take history and historical methods very seriously. And my understanding as a layperson who reads in some of this literature is that historical figure of Jesus almost certainly existed. So that there was this historical figure named Jesus. Now, the events surrounding his life, whether or not those are historical pieces of valid history, I don't think so. And that's because of beliefs I have about the nature of miracles and my commitment to something like naturalism. So I think that there are some features of the historical narrative that are just false, such as Jesus rising from the dead. I believe there is more skepticism about the figure of Moses, that many historians widely acknowledge that Moses likely was not a historical figure. That's surprising to me. I thought that and so I need to research it more. I'm not going to officially say that, like, I do not believe that Moses was a historical figure. I put him kind of in the camp of Socrates right now. I don't know if Socrates was a historical figure. We don't actually have any of Socrates' writing. He's Plato's mouthpiece in all of Plato's writings. Perhaps there was a Socrates. I don't know. It's one of those things I've kind of shelved to see if it's, should I believe that there was a historical Socrates? Should I believe that there was a historical Moses? I don't know, but it's looking doubtful.
I guess the more meta issue would be, who cares? How is historicity or what is false even an issue on your view?
And in a large way, I agree. A lot of people like to say, exactly. Christians caused all the wars. And I'm like, even if that were true, which I don't think that's true at all, even if that were true, that wouldn't tell us anything about the truth or falsity of Christianity. And, Christians on the other side of the camp do it too. They, will look at Stalin and Pol Pot and Hitler. And I'm like, well, whether or not that, again, I don't think that they were atheists or all of them were atheists. I don't know. I don't think Hitler was. But someone like Stalin, again, the truth of atheism and the truth of theism do not hinge at all on the actions of a couple of mass murderers, nor does the historical contingency of past wars that were almost certainly caused by economic features more than anything else. Those were almost certainly what caused those wars. Again, the truth of the question of does God exist doesn't hinge on these historical facts. That's not to say these historical facts are not important in other very relevant ways.
I'm actually I think I'm in disagreement with both of you because I'm an Orthodox Christian, and part of the view of the history of the church is God interacting with the church. And if this is a metaphysics claim, it's like certain historical facts. What you mentioned, Ben, are sort of like ad hominem genetic fallacies against the ethics of either Christianity or atheism. And it's like, should we add in our theoretical virtues and or models predictions of what could happen in human history and what that would look like if God or if God did not interact, and whether the significance of Jesus rising from the dead, well, that would, I think, hopefully be significant for Ben, of whether this man Jesus rose from the dead and claimed to be God and so on. But I do think some historical things can be used even on a metaphysics level, at least a predictive power or explanatory power, perhaps.
Right. The issue would be, does it follow? Right.
Yeah.
Does causing a war over economics follow from the gospel? That'd be that kind of an issue. It wouldn't be, did the person doing it claim to be a Christian, ergo it was due to Christianity. It's whether it's a cogent or viable.
You see it also from my camp. Christians are hypocrites. They say certain things and then they do other things. So what? That tells us absolutely nothing about the truth of Christianity. I hear that objection from my camp all the time, and I'm like,
again, I at least in theology, with our church structure, it's like we should have a model by which that is proper to worship God.
We can concede every single Christian is a hypocrite. We can concede that, and absolutely nothing about the truth of Christianity follows from that. Not a single thing.
Perhaps not the, and yeah, I'm in my mind. There's pushback on some respects, at least with like Protestantism versus Orthodoxy, because it's like there are predictive models of which how would such a person act if their theology is true and they're consistent with it. But that word consistent, I guess, would be important there, and whether there are any consistent Christians. But could we have a model in which there would be consistent people if such propositions were true? And could that consistency have integrity to their worldview and hence add some truth go up to it?
I'm sorry, bro. You lost me on that question.
I know. I promise there are some rational thoughts here.
No, I get what you're saying. The issue of consistency is the same as the issue with hypocrisy. On the ethical level, consistency would be logical. Hypocrisy would be more along the lines of ethical, so that a Christian could condemn hypocrisy. Absolutely. But an atheist would have to just say, well, look at what an accidentally existing ape is doing. And that's about it. They might have a personal preference for not accepting hypocrisy, but there'd be no universal imperative to not be a hypocrite, just like there'd be no universal imperative to be consistent.
That's not really where I was going. I was sort of going to the idea, is there a way to act in accordance to reality? And if there is, those ways actually tell you things about reality. And certain Christian models of the church tells us how we should worship God in creation and be stewards of creation. I'm saying some of those models don't work because of the outputs of the people who believe such things, because it's just not able to be consistent with how things are. And it's like I'm trying to avoid that is-ought, but like I'm also like, could we have predictive models of consistency in reality and how objective morality is and duties? Because I'm a virtue ethicist, and consistency is very important between your ethics and metaphysics.
Well,
become aware of the is-ought distinction.
The meta level issue. I'm sorry.
You're fine. Go ahead.
The meta level question wouldn't be, is there a way to be consistent with reality? The meta level question would be, is being consistent with reality a universal imperative or not? That's the starting point, not whether we can do it, but whether we should bother doing it. That's why it becomes an is-ought issue, as you mentioned. It's not, is there a way? Well, sure, we can grant that there's a way, but should we take that way? Is it even a universal imperative that we go that way? That's the meta level issue.
What were you going to say in response to what I said, Ben?
I was just saying that once you become aware of the is-ought distinction, you start to see it everywhere. You start to realize just how hard it is to avoid. Like, the mistake is very easy to make, and when you start to carve out the conceptual landscape with that tool, you start to realize the conceptual landscape looks a lot different once you take it into account.
I'm trying not to be like, oh, I'm the one who found the way, but I've been having thoughts of so many things, and it's like things seem to fit together in certain how at least my mind is working it, and I'm trying to find the right way to express it to others. But I do think there is consistency in what I'm saying, at least in my own.
You're building. It's like that tree, the seed, and the tree. Your tree is growing from that seed.
And I love that too. But I wouldn't say it's growing. I'm saying it's discoveries of reality. Unless, or is that a description of Hegelian epistemology instead of how reality is working?
So that's really just a metaphor that Hegelians use to try to help, because what Hegelians want to say is that we have all the pieces in front of us right now. Like, all of the tools that we need to have knowledge are contained both in the person doing the judging and the objects of the judgment, the reality. All of the pieces are there. We just have to fit them together. Just like all of the tree is in the seed. It just hasn't grown out yet. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that.
And so instead of thinking of history as knowledge as something static through time, knowledge is something dynamic, something that is changing and growing through time. We learn language that has been passed on by generations after generations with and so, like, we've inherited all of that. There's been this world spirit that has gone through time, and it has evolved over time, and it has given rise to many different civilizations and language games and forms of life and technologies, and it's evolving now.
Zeitgeist.
Zeitgeist, yes, yes, exactly. That's where this is.
What happens when the zeitgeist turns into a? What happens when the zeitgeist turns into a poltergeist?
Yeah, well, then horror movies happen.
You don't have to answer that. It's just
that's how horror movies begin.
I mean, I think
some of us have been knocked offline. So
I think there's been a progression in technology, but a regression in thought. And I'm not even saying the people in our camp, but like as a whole of society, people just don't like. Greece was all about these questions and so much of room. No, we're still on. I think you froze for a second.
Yeah, I definitely did.
I like that model when it comes to human discoveries of knowledge, but I would say truth is static. I think Ben would say that as well, that we don't bring in new truths, but we're just taking in I'm a realist, so I'm like John Locke's realism, where like things have properties and those properties are real, and our minds capture those properties, and we're making discoveries and doing the best to connect those discoveries together. I guess I may disagree in the history of that progress when it comes to
yes, there's a dialectical between belief and truth that's ever evolving, or belief and justification that's ever evolving and getting closer to the truth. And so knowledge is roughly justified true belief. Those are at least necessary conditions, maybe not sufficient conditions, as Edmund Gettier famously pointed out to us.
Yeah, I do find in much analytic philosophy there's denial of the good and the beautiful, not just the true, which I'm like I think there's a consistent model, and when you deny the good and the beautiful, I think your worldview just has to exclude real things, hence my realism. And as beauty, things have properties of beauty that just the mind attaches themselves to and becomes captivated by. That is a natural phenomena of such properties.
There's also a reason. There's also a reason that explains an aesthetic reason that explains why the Mona Lisa is in the Louvre and your childhood artwork on the refrigerator didn't make the Louvre.
Well,
Exactly.
the thing is, they say beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but it's not really. It preference
And Voltaire says a witty saying proves nothing.
preference is in
Yeah.
the eye of the beholder, but beauty is
Even though that's a witty
absolute.
saying, even though that's a witty saying, trying to say something.
Yeah.
But
And so basically what he's saying is that our rhetoric is only as good as the argument that underlies them. And so I just think that the arguments for anti-realism about beauty aren't that great when you think about them.
yeah,
Aesthetics is a very underappreciated area of philosophy, to my mind, at least.
I'm not trying to go for a genetic fallacy, but it's like I think it's something they lack the experience, or they for some reason shove those experiences deep down in their mind and don't think about them.
You have to be trained. You have to be trained to think about beauty. Like that's why there's artists and musicians, and they're learning something. There's something called music theory. It's a theory about something real in the world.
Exactly. And it's like, of course, the people who don't have that knowledge are going to be like, those aren't things I have to think about, and then make this category that follows from that already previous thought. All
right, guys. Well, I do have to go. I do hear my baby.
One more question, Ben. Ben, is your wife Mrs. Pac-Man?
No. She is Mrs. Watkins, but she's not Blake Speed Watkins either.
What's that thing over your left shoulder? Is that Mrs. Pac-Man?
Oh no, that is a Midway case, but I have a Raspberry Pi system in it, so I have all kinds of games on it. But I got the Midway. Yeah, I just got the Midway case on like Craigslist.
Well,
that gives me perfect peace right there. Now I know. Now I know.
Hey
Ben, it's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure. Let's do this again. It's very nice meeting you.
Likewise. God bless.
You guys can come on my channel again as well. But thank you for watching, everyone. Provoke wisdom, provoke reason, have integrity, and have a good Saturday.